I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. I went and saw the Barbie movie recently, and no, I'm not the last person on earth to see the Barbie movie. I actually recorded this track in the summer. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because while I was waiting for the movie and the opening credits and ads and all of that kind of stuff were playing, there was an ad for the cinema, like the ad for Cineplex. And the jingle that they were playing, I was like, I know that jingle. I know that riff. And I could not figure out what it was while I was sitting there. Like, did I use that same track? Did I use that same audio for something? And I was like playing the Women's Health Unplugged jingle in my head, and it wasn't that. And I have a second podcast for clinicians, the Confident Clinician podcast, and it wasn't that. And it wasn't until 2 days later that I remembered that we actually had a jingle for this podcast before we rebranded it as Women's Health Unplugged. It was called the Integrative Medicine Podcast. And I did about 8 or 9 episodes at that time, and they actually performed beautifully, that podcast. And the reason we changed is because I didn't have the consistency with publishing episodes that I needed. And part of that is because I was quite confused who I was talking to. And so when you don't know your audience, it makes it really difficult to get behind the mic because you don't really know what you're sharing. I was mixing in talking to like patient facing with dissecting, some studies and really debunking some challenges we have in integrative medicine and reading studies. And I realized that that was not a recipe for a successful podcast. And mostly it wasn't a successful recipe for me to feel confident about what I was talking about week to week. And so over a year, I had only done like maybe 8 episodes. And so we canned it and then rebranded it as Women's Health Unplugged. And Women's Health Unplugged had a long streak before we ever took a break. I think we had done like over 230 weeks in a row before I took a week off, which was last year, summer 2022. And then we've now taken another summer off, 2023, which has been really good for us to regroup and figure out, what we want to focus on, season to season, to start to recruit some really high level guests. It's been great. But it was the jingle from this previous podcast that the Cineplex also used as their jingle to convince you to buy like their membership card. Anyways, today we're going to talk about thyroid, which we haven't addressed in a long time on the podcast, and the questions of whether or not treating your thyroid is necessary, what to expect if you treat your thyroid, and why treating your thyroid actually won't cause weight loss, even if you have hypothyroidism, actually. And so I want to debunk that so that you, understand that gland a little bit better, that you understand your lab work a little bit better, and that you don't feel so frustrated when you are trying to navigate healthcare with respect to that organ, because I do think there is a lot of misinformation about thyroid online. There's a lot of, we've made a lot of conclusions about what thyroid hormone does and does not do for patients based on the fact that thyroid is related to metabolism. And I think we just have this love affair with talking about metabolism in the health and wellness space, that anything that is remotely connected to metabolism, we just like bastardize it when we talk about it, and make all of these sweeping connections, because humans seem to be on this like relentless pursuit of weight loss, and anything that we can tie into that discussion, gets so much airtime and so much space, when it really, especially for thyroid, doesn't deserve it. So just your quick reminder lesson: your thyroid is a gland that's in your neck. And it is responsible for regulating various aspects of metabolism. So thyroid hormone is produced after your brain produces a series of hormones to turn up or down thyroid hormone production. And then the thyroid hormones themselves act peripherally, meaning like in the rest of your body, and regulate aspects of metabolism. We're going to stay there. We're just going to stay super high level with that. And there are times where that particular gland will underfunction. And the most common cause of low thyroid globally is actually iodine deficiency. So iodine is required for making thyroid hormone. And if we look at low resource countries or developing nations, they have iodine deficiency, or it's quite endemic to have iodine deficiency, and that's why they have hypothyroid. Whereas when we look at developing nations, North America, our most common cause of hypothyroidism is actually Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition. And so in saying that, just a quick one-off is nobody in North America is iodine deficient. The time that we would maybe get close would be pregnancy, because our needs go up a little bit, but that's typically solved with a prenatal vitamin, and we tend to use a lot of that in North America. But no North American is iodine deficient. And so right off the bat, if you've ever explored supplements for thyroid, etc., you'll see they put a huge emphasis on iodine that's not actually necessary for a North American patient to be taking excess iodine. And there actually may be some harm associated with that with respect to the thyroid. So that cause of hypothyroidism in North America is typically autoimmune, meaning that we've also, in addition to maybe finding your thyroid lab work being suboptimal or even just straight up out of range, you also have elevated thyroid antibodies, which is signifying that there's an inflammatory and autoimmune process that's happening in your thyroid. Now, you can have those antibodies be elevated and your thyroid still be quite happily functioning. Hashimoto's thyroiditis happens over a continuum, meaning the day we find it, you may not be particularly hypothyroid and may not even need medication to thrive, but there is a time course that happens with Hashimoto's where your thyroid over time will lose its capacity for producing thyroid hormone. So if you've been found in those initial stages of Hashi's, you probably just need to be monitored maybe a little bit more frequently than we would maybe monitor someone who doesn't have elevated thyroid antibodies. But it doesn't mean that you're necessarily a shoo-in for medication if you if your thyroid is functioning well. And patients with Hashimoto's actually may benefit from medication being added a touch earlier in their thyroid journey than patients that don't have Hashimoto's but do have hypothyroidism. So, this is where we kind of get lost in the gray of like, when do we treat patients and at what point do we add thyroid medication? Patients with Hashimoto's thyroiditis don't feel well even when we do treat them. So it's difficult because we have good cutoffs for, so say, frank hypothyroidism that is not related to autoimmune disease. We know when to treat you, and we have a decent idea of what targets to treat you to. With Hashimoto's, it gets a little grayer because patients generally have a lower quality of life. They report more symptoms at the same numbers as patients without Hashimoto's. So, if your TSH is 3.5 and you don't have Hashimoto's, you are probably fine. if you have a TSH of 3.5 and you have Hashimoto's, you probably don't feel that well. And that's tough because giving you thyroid hormone doesn't fix all of those symptoms. And it's really created this challenge with this particular condition because patients want to be treated. Their lab work is a bit gray. They don't actually feel well when we do treat them, but maybe we should still treat them anyways. So I want to leave that part of the conversation for right now. It's a little bit outside the scope of what I wanted to talk about today. If you have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, though, just know that thyroid hormone isn't the end-all be-all to how you feel and isn't the end-all be-all to weight management, which is really some of the two big take-homes I want you to have from this episode. So low thyroid has been blamed for weight gain since the beginning of time, or since the beginning of thyroid hormone discovery. And it is a big chicken and the egg when it comes to trying to tease out what's going on with your lab work versus what's going on with your metabolism. So if you don't have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, so your antibodies are negative, if you are in a larger body, your thyroid hormone levels will change or are different than someone who is in a smaller body. Your body produces more TSH and produces more T3 when you have a larger body. And if we sort of thought about it, it kind of makes sense, right? It's meeting the demands essentially of the environment. And so TSH will be higher in patients as their BMI is higher. And that in the past has been really misinterpreted as people are in a larger body because their thyroid is elevated, because their TSH is elevated. And that's actually not true. So TSH goes up when body size increases as a response to a larger body in being able to navigate and manage the needs of a larger body. It's not causing the person to gain weight necessarily. That said, we do see weight gain when patients have hypothyroidism. So, and I know you're saying like, well, how can both of those be true at the same time, Jordan? The weight gain we see in hypothyroidism is incredibly complex. So when thyroid hormone levels are off and it's in the range of hypothyroidism, it is affecting metabolism 100%. It is affecting the number of calories that your body burns in a day when you are in that hypothyroid range, to the tune, we think, of a couple hundred calories. So the like 2 Reese's peanut butter cups worth of calories that your thyroid is burning less of when you have hypothyroidism is not responsible for 20 pounds of weight gain that someone may experience over the course of a year. So what is it, right? And this is where, like, anytime we're talking about weight and bodies and metabolism, we have to acknowledge the complexity of it. What else happens when someone is hypothyroid? Right? They have other symptoms. They're tired. Their mood is low. So they don't move as much. And our nutrition probably also changes. When patients are tired and their mood is low, their nutrition changes. And they eat different things. They eat more hyperpalatable food. So when thyroid hormone is low, yes, it impacts metabolism, but way more than that, it impacts the entire person. And just like when we transition in menopause and we're impacting the entire person, and that is the reason why we see weight gain in menopause, it's likely the reason we see weight gain in hypothyroid patients as well. It's not just that the furnace has been turned down. It's when we have lower levels of thyroid hormone, we overall don't feel good. And when we don't feel good, our behaviors change. And behavior is the biggest driver of weight management, not, whether we turn up or down the furnace by a couple of degrees. So if you have had untreated hypothyroid, or if your thyroid has been on this long course to change, which is typical with patients with Hashimoto's, is you may have experienced some weight gain as a consequence of having hypothyroidism. And the reason behind that is incredibly complex. And so before we point our finger at one single number on your lab work, we probably need to back up and look at the entire ecosystem that those hormones are operating in and ask ourselves, like, how much is your fatigue influencing your step count or your, ability to go to the gym or, the number of activities that you do during the day? How much is your mood impacting your food choices or your portion sizes, right? Or your late night eating, right? How much of those things are actually coming into the equation because you don't feel well, right? And again, those couple hundred calories, and I hate pairing calories up against like a particular food, but a couple of hundred calories is not enough, and it's not very much to substantially influence weight management in patients unless we projected it over like years and years and years and years, right? 100-calorie overage, or meaning that your metabolism is changed by 100 calories. If we projected that over years and years and years, then yes, we probably would see some weight change given all other things staying normal. But that's not what happens in hypothyroid, right? Your whole body is affected, your whole life, behavior, etc. are all affected by it. So that doesn't totally explain the fact that we see higher TSH in patients in a larger body. It's not just about their thyroid hormone levels, it's that their larger body requires more thyroid hormone, and that's why the TSH levels are elevated. And we will see some change in thyroid hormone when patients lose weight. So if we put patients through a intensive 12-month process, their thyroid hormone levels do change a little bit, and their TSH levels may come down a little bit, and their free T3 levels will also come down. And in the wellness space, we often talk about T3 as being this like, penultimate hormone that we really care about. And the reality is when we lose weight, that number drops. And that's not a bad thing. It's dropping because body size is changing and the needs of that body are changing. And so T3 levels will also change. And so if you don't have Hashimoto's thyroid and you are sitting in a BMI, a higher BMI, or I'm not labeling that good or bad, I'm just saying if you're sitting in a higher BMI, your thyroid hormone levels are going to be a reflection of that. It does not mean that you have hypothyroidism per se, and it does not mean you need to be treated. And I often will see patients that are metabolically healthy, are in larger bodies, and are walking around with a TSH of 3.9, 4.1, and we're really quick to treat that person with a drug that has consequences and side effects, etc. When the rest of their thyroid panel is actually great. And the reason that TSH is a little bit elevated is because their body size is larger than another person who has a smaller body. So you can see the problem there, right? Because we've labeled thyroid as being the driver of weight. We've often decided that if someone has a larger body or a higher BMI, that is something that we need to treat. The doctors decide that, and the patient decides that, sometimes both. And then we get this lab work back that's like higher than someone who is petite. And that seems like something we are supposed to or need to treat. And yet the lab work is just a reflection of body size. It's not the cause of body size. So I'm just going to summarize really quickly so that you feel like you understand all the things I've just said there. If your antibodies against your thyroid are negative, you do not have Hashimoto's thyroid, and your thyroid levels are quote unquote normal, and you have a larger body, your thyroid might sit above what the wellness industry has quoted as optimal, right? We'll say things like it's optimal for your thyroid to be below 2, your TSH to be below 2. And then we have a person who has a BMI of 33 and their TSH is 3.8, but their antibodies are negative. So they don't have an autoimmune thyroid disease. The rest of their thyroid panel looks fine. that TSH is a reflection of what it takes to move a larger body in space. That's it. That's it. And so we don't need to medicate. And so that's a really important take home, that your thyroid needs to be interpreted with like in context to you and your body, which is exactly what we want with lab work, right? We want it to be contextualized against us. You don't want it to be held up against the standard of a 5'2", 110-pound petite person, which is what we're doing sometimes in the wellness space when we say that thyroid levels aren't optimal. What does that mean, right? It takes a different amount of thyroid hormone to run a body that is 115 pounds than it does to run a body that is 200 pounds. That's it. And that doesn't mean that one of those people is healthy and the other one isn't. It just is actually different. If your antibodies are positive and you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, then we're going to look at your lab work with a different lens. And we want to consider your symptoms. We want to consider your goals. So patients that are in that preconception phase of life, we treat them differently and more aggressively, because we know that we can help them get pregnant and stay pregnant if we do that. We want to monitor your thyroid hormone more frequently, and we may intervene slightly earlier than we would for patients that don't have elevated antibodies. But if you don't have Hashimoto's, like, we just look at your thyroid panel against your body and the rest of your life, and if it all seems well and good, then let's not treat it. The problem is that you've read online that your thyroid is responsible for your body size. And so now you come into a doctor's appointment, you've read that your TSH needs to be below 2, and you're at 3.6, and you want medication. So let's talk about why that's not helpful, and why you've heard so many people say they've lost weight with their thyroid hormone, even though that isn't actually true. So we've tried to make people lose weight with thyroid hormone, right? This is not a new consideration. We've literally tried in every way, shape, and form in studies. And the reason that we originally thought that giving thyroid hormone was going to make people lose weight is partly because of what we observe with Graves' disease, which is autoimmune hyperthyroid. So if someone has autoimmune hyperthyroid, meaning that their thyroid is overactive or the antibodies they produce increase their thyroid activity, those people lose weight unintentionally, right? They also feel like they've been plugged in. So this is not a desirable thing. And there are a lot of consequences of having Graves' disease that's unmanaged. But one of the side effects of Graves is unintentional weight loss, because thyroid hormone is high. And of course, like us in our reductionistic way was like, well, if we lose weight when thyroid is high, then maybe we can lose weight if we give thyroid hormone. Not the case. Actually doesn't work that way. So patients will lose weight with Graves. Patients will gain weight if they have hypothyroidism. But if they have hypothyroidism and we give them thyroid hormone, they won't lose weight. We've tried giving excessive amounts of thyroid hormone. Where this is best observed is in patients who've had thyroid cancer, because we remove their thyroid and then we give them slightly more thyroid hormone than they need in order to continue to suppress any thyroid hormone tissue that's left behind, any thyroid tissue that's left behind. We kind of over-medicate them on purpose. They don't lose weight. We've tried giving excessive amounts of thyroid hormone to patients with hypothyroidism with the goal of weight loss. They don't lose weight. We've tried changing the targets for TSH and really suppressing it. So we give them so much thyroid hormone that we suppress their TSH to undetectable levels. They don't lose weight. So we can't induce weight loss with thyroid hormone. And believe me, we have tried. There are many, many, many studies on this. We can't make people lose weight. So why does Sally, your friend, who finally was treated for her hypothyroid, claim that she's lost 15 pounds in the first 3 months of being on her thyroid hormone? Right? We've all heard that. We've heard the friend that lost weight because they had their thyroid treated, or we've read it online. Why did that happen? Well, there's two reasons. One is that we do have some fluid retention when we are in a hypothyroid state. And so massive weight loss that happens in a really short period of time always should make you consider fluid retention and fluid loss. Always. Your friend who lost weight doing keto, your friend who lost weight doing juicing, you're right, like your friend who, like any of those friends who've lost weight quickly have manipulated fluid. And the same happens when we treat hypothyroidism. There is a fluid shift that happens when we begin to treat hypothyroidism, and that does result in some rapid weight loss in the first couple of weeks of using thyroid hormone. It's just water. The second piece is that when patients feel better, they do better. And so when we treat patients hypothyroid and their depression improves or their energy improves, which really is like the thing we're after, is their energy and their mood, what happens? They go for a walk. They eat a salad, right? They feel better. They do better in their daily routine and in their life. And that projected over 12 or 14 weeks might result in some weight loss. And when we stack those two things up together, right, rapid fluid shifting and patients generally feeling better and then being more, air quotes, on track with their nutrition, probably results in some weight loss. And so the friend that you know that went on thyroid hormone and then lost weight, that happened for those two reasons. Now, that person's weight loss will plateau, and if you are that person, your weight loss probably plateaued. And often that pushes people back to their doctor's office saying that they need to increase their thyroid hormone again. But when that happens, or if your doctor does that and increases your medication dose, you don't lose the water again, so you don't have more weight loss. And you might not feel that much better if we increase your dosage of your medication. And so you stay the same. And so that initial boost you get in change on the scale from water, and also because you feel better, that does plateau or stops over time unless we continue to change behavior, continue to change energy expenditure, etc., which we may or may not want to do, right? So that's why people lose weight when they go on thyroid hormone. They feel better and we get rid of their water retention. So this is where things get hard, frustrating, all sorts of emotions, because we've kind of distilled medicine down to this like single cause, single effect, right? And I will often work with patients who, they maybe require 3 things, I'll say, to get us onto a path towards being healthy. But they want to do one because they want to know which one thing works, right? I'll say, well, you need this medication, this supplement, and this dietary change. And they'll say, well, I'll just start with this because how will we know what worked? How will we know what worked? When it's like, I recognize that you're a complex biological system and person with emotions that makes different decisions every day. You need more than one thing to solve your complex health issue. I mean, we're not talking about like a UTI, right? Where there's a pathogen and there's a villain and then there's a treatment and we give the treatment and the villain goes away and you feel better. What we're talking about is a complex, chronic, thing that happens over time, like metabolism, weight management, etc. And so there isn't going to be one thing that fixes it. And we really have to banish that thought process. And so if you've pointed your finger at your thyroid as being the sole cause of anything in your life, we need to back that up and look at the entire picture, not just that one aspect of your health. And the same goes when you're a physician or clinician looking at lab work and looking at thyroid lab work, is you have to back up and contextualize that against the patient's body, against their life, against their activity level. And so both of us need to simmer, I think, when it comes to prescribing thyroid hormone. Patients need to, I almost said see the FD. Am I allowed to say see the FD? I was going to say it about the doctors too. Patients need to see the FD about asking for thyroid hormone when you don't need it. Doctors also need to see the FD about prescribing thyroid hormone to patients who don't need it and misinterpreting their lab work because they're not contextualizing it against the patient's body size. We also, and if you don't know what that means, it's calm the F down. And we also need to consider the utility of thyroid hormone in an entire ecosystem of supporting patients for weight management and metabolism and mood and energy. And sometimes it is the wonderful solution that kickstarts people into a path towards better. 100% I have had patients where I found their Hashimoto's. I found their suboptimal thyroid function. I treated it with thyroid hormone. They got on a path, right? Better path towards health, wellness, better mood, better energy, could keep their employment. All of those things are incredibly positive. And sometimes when I do these sort of more myth-busting-y kind of podcasts, I can hear, even in my own words, that it may sound like this is never a good idea. And that's not true. All I'm saying is we need to think harder before we prescribe a drug. We need to never point our finger at a singular thing as being responsible for anything in your life and your health. We shouldn't do it as your practitioners, and you shouldn't do it as the patients. And we also need to, be reminded around things like weight stigma and body size, and how when we put patients on a bell curve that don't belong being there, or that we shouldn't even have a bell curve, we misunderstand parts about their health and their lab work, and that can end up overtreating. And there's always a cost to overtreating patients. We don't need to put people on thyroid hormone who have a TSH of 3.8 that don't have Hashimoto's that are in a larger body, full stop. You don't need to be on thyroid hormone. And so I'm calling those pieces out because I want you as the consumer to feel well educated and calm when you go into your doctor's office and you talk about your thyroid lab work. I have this podcast kind of brewing in my head, and I want to call it Licensed to Disappoint, because with the amount of information that patients can now consume online, especially about HRT, this is one that's really up and coming, is that patients are demanding medication. When that, funnily, in my field, that was the complete opposite 10 years ago, where patients were like, I want to do everything without medication. Now we have access to sort of bioidentical hormone, and I don't like that term bioidentical, but what I'm saying there is that they are the natural versions of those drugs, and that sits better with patients. We have access to bioidentical thyroid hormone and HRT, like sex hormones, and now patients are demanding it whether they require it or not. And that's a difficult conversation, because we've had patients leave our office because we wouldn't give them HRT or wouldn't give them thyroid hormone, when, especially with the thyroid hormone piece, they were looking to abuse it for weight management. And how, with our license on our head, can we ethically give thyroid hormone for someone who just is asking for it where it's not indicated, and they want to use it for an indication that isn't real because it doesn't cause weight loss? So it's interesting. And so I just want you to be well equipped when you can go into these conversations with your practitioner, and not feel so frustrated, because the thyroid metabolism weight conversation is a frustrating one. We have reduced it down to this single math equation, and it really is way more complex than that. And I want you to feel confident in understanding and knowing that, so that you can get that 360 care that you deserve when it comes to supporting your health. See you next week. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed.
If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.